So, in my opinion, I do believe Assassin's Creed Valhalla is overrated and it still hasn't found its original identity. I genuinely believe RPG is the main culprit as it's completely changed the mechanism and flow and structure of the game. I'll get into that shortly. I'm fully aware the majority of people are going to be against me, but that's okay. This is how I see things because I have played from the very beginning up to Origins. So I know how the game's evolved, I know how the structure was, I know how the stealth was, how the characters were, how the game was in flow of combat and stealth, the balance between it, and the ways you took out a hierarchical structure. Reality is, Assassin's Creed Valhalla is unfortunately just like Odyssey and Origins. It's sparse, it's open world, and that's a key problem with RPG based games. Normally, they are open world. Look at Gears of War 5. Originally, that was a linear style map structured game which was tight, claustrophobic, and felt like a horror game. That's exactly why it was unique and it's had its own identity. When RPG mechanisms and mechanics came into Gears of War 5, it completely changed the way the game ran and performed and the look of it. And people hated it. So what's different there to here? It's the same exact result over time. The key problem with RPG in Assassin's Creed, with map structure the way it is, it's lost its identity. Why? Because back in the past, Assassin's Creed originally was mainly a citadel based structure or some kind of giant city in some way. And you had to work your way around it. You had to take control of certain places. You had to take out hierarchical structures from the Order, the Templars, in certain areas. You had to work your way up to, let's say, the big castle, the big stronghold, where the final battle, the final, assassination contract took place. It felt like you had progression to make. It felt dense, it felt compact, it felt alive. You had markets, you had streets, you had shops, you had certain maybe events where people were getting arrested or getting apprehended or getting robbed. It felt alive, it felt kind of realistic, and you could intervene if you wanted to. There was times where guards were guarding areas that had patrols. It just felt like it was a good flowing realistic style game with a lot going on in a small claustrophobic environment which is rich in detail and rich in volume and density with other humans acting and operating around themselves. You had building structures, renovating places, watching the progression evolve without it being grinding. You didn't have to spend too long. There was secrets, there was mysteries, there was underground things you could explore, but it wasn't OTT. It was still somewhat believable. Now, if you compare that to Assassin's Creed Valhalla and even Odyssey, it's just very fantasy style now. Very sparse, open, glittery, sparkly. And it affects the pace and flow of the game because it limits and restricts you now. You can't use stealth as much now. All you can do is just charge in and get into clunky battles. That's what the issue is. It doesn't feel as tight or as compact. The actual way you operate around the story or a mission is different now. It's very open. There isn't really much to interact with as much now. You can't really hide as much. You can't blend in as much. Just seems like you just have to charge in, kind of bit like a Far Cry Outpost remake in a way. That's what it feels like. So it's kind of lost that original identity. And additionally, it links to the story because of a citadel based game or some kind of city structure. There was obviously different people in command of certain areas or certain buildings, and you work your way up, taking out the Order, taking out the Templars. It made sense. Whereas in the newer Assassin's Creed games, including Valhalla, obviously there isn't as much of a structure in city or operation and command of areas as much as it used to be. And I think additionally, leading on, another key issue with RPG is the combat, the flow and style of the game. Originally, Assassin's Creed might have been a bit more arcadey, but you could do multiple chain kills. It felt quite cinematic, unique weapon animations and certain ways of taking people out. It was fast, it was flowing, it was smooth. You felt like an actual assassin. Whereas unfortunately nowadays, like with Valhalla, with the silly health bar system, the stamina system, not really being able to do the same counter attacks as you would in the past, the flow has gone with the power level, with the health bar of the enemy, and the stupid numbers as they come up on screen of how much damage you do. It doesn't feel as realistic anymore. You have to do multiple slashes just to kill one individual. It ruins the flow of the game, and that's all because of RPG. You don't feel like an assassin anymore. An assassin is someone that does it somewhat silently, or at least gets the job done quick. But you no longer do that anymore, do you? That's what the issue is. And even back then, how you could just fight with a hidden blade, you felt completely defenseless, but still you were very dangerous and it could still work. The sparks flying off blades, the sounds. Now it just sounds very clunky. The animations are a bit clunky. It seems a bit OTT in that aspect. This is what I mean. There is so much to take in. Now, if we move on next to... What do we move on next to? The fantasy aspect, and even including combat as well. It doesn't feel like an Assassin's Creed game still because of the fantasy style bullshit with the some of visual effects as well as the boss battles. In the past, Assassin's Creed had some kind of structure and it made it somewhat believable. You know, the boss battles, you'd be fighting another human for most part of it, or some kind of little army with commanders, and then you move on to the main guy who's retreated inside of a castle or a building or underground, and you got to chase him and then do the final scene and sequence. That's how it was. Whereas in the newer ones, like with Valhalla, silly boss battles with a wolf companion, making it almost like World of Warcraft, having to fight some kind of giant monster glowing in red like it's some kind of demon Dark Souls style game. I just don't understand it. It's just too much all over the place. It's not as believable anymore. And even to an extent, Assassin's Creed Origins is no better with all those giant gods you had to face and kind of like mummies in a way. It just seemed a bit too silly. I think one other thing I want to add in with the combat as well, the power level, the health bar, the stamina, the way you aim with a bow and arrow, how it goes into that first person mode. It just changes the structure of what Assassin's Creed originally was. Even the camera zoom, even the HUD and visual effect, it just reeks of RPG with all the different bits and bobs, symbols, health bars, stamina bars on screen. It clutters it up. The camera angle and zoom is slightly, kind of off-center, bit zoomed out, bit too much, looks a bit weird. Whereas back in the past, the way the camera angle was, the movement, the speed, it was kind of close, but it felt like you were moving with them. You were moving with them through the crowd. It was almost like you were there. At times it had that slow-paced, intense, intimidating feel as you slowly make your way to a, let's say, guarded building, and they look at you, and then you just walk up to it, and then double assassination. Like that, it had that feel, that slow-paced feel at times of it's going to kick off. And then the fast-paced parkour. Honestly, where is the parkour anymore? Because realistically, a true Assassin's Creed game, like how I said, citadel-based structure or some kind of city with buildings, rooftops, and jumping off points and viewpoints, most of that is lacking in the newer Assassin's Creed games, like with Valhalla. Obviously, there's not as many buildings anymore because it's more open world and more vegetation and more empty, meaning you can't jump from building to building and continue that over time. It doesn't have that parkour assassin style anymore, so it's lacking in that department as well. This is what I'm saying. And overall, the story structure, the dialogue, the choices, the outcomes, the character selection, people are all on, in a way, a different journey. And is that a bad thing? No, because it follows your own unique choices, which I guess is good. But I think in terms of discussing it afterwards with other people, sometimes it's better to have a shared experience than a separated, isolated one. Just like how you watch movies, whether you watch it in the cinemas or at home, or maybe on your device at home. You all experience the same outcome and feel. You're all in on it together. You all feel it together, and you can all discuss it afterwards. Whereas Assassin's Creed with the RPG and the multiple choices, you kind of feel a bit left out. Maybe another person got a better outcome than you did. Maybe they experienced something unique which you didn't, and then you've got to replay it all over again. And it can kind of be a bit tedious and annoying. And linking on with tedious and annoying, one thing RPG normally does with games is either, well, additionally, microtransactions, boosters. Now, I think they've been taken out of Valhalla, so I guess that's a good thing. But aside from that, the grind. RPG-based games normally have a grind, whether it's progression, power level, item score, unique items, abilities. It just takes too long. And although people can say it's a good thing, I mean, I don't know. At the end of the day, Assassin's Creed Valhalla is a bit like The Witcher because it's RPG based and it's kind of dragged out in terms of story, pace, and tone. And yet, look at Cyberpunk, made by people that made Witcher, and RPG based game yet again, but its own unique one. And yet people are demanding it for it to be shorter. I mean, it'd be interesting if some of them that play Assassin's Creed Valhalla see what they think of it, because Valhalla is supposedly a longer game, so you can credit them on that. And finally, just to tick off everything else, it's in an identity crisis because Valhalla, especially, because it's continued, it's not learnt from its past mistakes. It still follows fantasy RPG, not how it used to be. But the main key problem is, as well, is the style of game it's trying to be like. It's trying to be like a Witcher 3 remake in terms of RPG style and the visual look. It's trying too hard to be like For Honor, because it's made by the same people, like with the raids and the fights. It's trying to be a bit like Far Cry as well in certain areas with the outposts, but they're isolated and quite empty. But then there's the exploration and vegetation around. And with it trying to implement too many ideas, it's losing what Assassin's Creed originally was. Just go back to basics. And I think one thing to link on from it, especially with the Viking sieges and war, is, at the end of the day, Assassin's Creed, assassin, to an extent, lone wolf killer, get the job done. Not have a giant army behind you. Yeah, you did have the Brotherhood and the Order, but, they weren't always there together, were they? They operated in the shadows, but at times, or for a fair bit of it, solo. They all went on and did their own thing. And that's basically how it went. But nowadays, if you look at it, it seems to be mainly to do with armies, having an army charging in. Just seems a bit silly. As for DLC of Assassin's Creed, I don't know what to really think of that, because with Odyssey, what was it, Atlantis or something, with the power suits looking like Batman from Injustice, Gods Among Us or something. Yeah, I don't know how that's going to turn out. I think overall, though, I feel it's still just not how it should be. I feel if it was a standalone game and not an Assassin's Creed title, it probably would be alright. But obviously, it's not the case. So that's what the issue is. And because it's continued this long, I don't think it's going to change. It's going to continue to be like this. And overall, I just feel other people aren't truly seeing it the way I'm seeing it. So I think that basically sums it all up.